There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The payments professor sparks revelations. No need to fear the Fed now.
Hey everybody, Payments Professor here, and today we're going to talk about one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. You all know this. I love payments operations. And today we got Bhaskar Sakura. Sorry, I already messed up your name. And he is the founder and CEO of Bicycle, and he's going to be helping us talk about things about how we can make payments operations more observable. So Bhaskar, I want to welcome you to the Payments Podium today.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, the first question I got to ask you, if you're familiar with the Payments Podium, you probably know this is coming, but always love to hear how in the world did you get involved in electronic payments? Because that's one of, those things. I've only had two people ever out of hundreds of episodes say, I grew up wanting to do this. Most of us, it's like somehow we went to school, got a degree and got a job and landed in payments. So how did you end up here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we, as a product, we have a product that actually focuses on three core verticals. One of them is payments. So maybe not per se in payments operations, but that's how I'm kind of linked to it. I could definitely do a little bit of background on how I got into this sort of space, overall, if that works. Yeah,
that works. I just love to know what got you here, why you're here now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent a big part of my career building app dynamics, Kevin, where the core idea was, if software is critical to the business, you need to see what's happening inside it in real time. And then how do you get from signal to action, really, really fast? That experience, I think, really shaped how I think. And Bicycle, which is what I'm working on right now, the basic idea is similar, but applied to business operations, right? So, and where is that the most important? Payments, retail, and travel, and transactional businesses. So that's kind of my link to it, because in payment operations, you have a constant stream of signals. You have approvals, you have declines, you have routing, you have inventory, suppliers, customer behavior. So this is basically what's happening in transactional businesses. And instead of looking at dashboards, because everybody has a lot of dashboards, the challenge that I think we're trying to basically really handle is by the time someone notices something important, figures out what changed and gets it to the right team, the business has already taken a hit. And nothing is sort of more important than doing that in payments, because you're losing time, you're losing money. And I'm happy to give one or two examples, but that's really the link back.
What I'm hearing from you is you really found something that needed to be solved for. That is going to be able to help the industry. And it's along the idea of payments operations. Can I actually just start off with something basic? Because when I talk people with operations, the question usually comes up, well, what does operations look like? Really, what does good payment operations look like? So how would you answer that just to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things to start about is that, why is sort of really super efficient payment operations necessary? That's a little bit of that comes back to sort of like the changes in the payment operations ecosystem. I feel like it used to be a little more linear and a little more forgiving, and obviously for good reason. It's gotten sort of like less forgiving, etc. The ecosystem itself is faster, it's more fragmented, and much more interconnected, right? But a single payment outcome depends on too many moving parts. Like it'll depend on issuer behavior, acquirer behavior, processor performance, fraud tooling, tokenization, authentication, routing rules, merchant config, cross-border stuff, and in many cases, like multiple third parties all touching the same transaction path. So when you have this level of complexity, if you're not continuously detecting and diagnosing and coordinating within sort of like a certain amount of time, that is why this is sort of super important to have like this operations culture, because especially when the payments platform is working with an e-commerce company or something, just one bad routing rule can cost you meaningful revenue, or let's say a degradation in a PSP, right? So that's one of the core reasons why you need to do this in a timely way. But the other thing is that complexity in payment operations, it's no longer like in one place, right? A payment issue might look like a fraud issue, but sometimes it's like a processor timeout. Or it might look like a processor issue, but it's really an issuer specific behavior only on one cross-border corridor, right? So it's very time sensitive, but it's also very specific, and you have to get to the right part, which is actually impacting it, because it might at the surface look like declining conversion, but the root cause is actually approval friction on one payment method, not on everything. Right?
That actually brings up a good question there, because what I'm hearing, and again, I've been doing this for decades, and I can remember when it used to be as simple as upload file, download file, process, you're done. You know, maybe one or two things had to be manually touched. But you mentioned like total industries that have been created over the years that have all become part of that payment stream. But you also then started mentioning about how you look at what's working, what's not working. And I believe you've talked about too, that sometimes you look at things like the approval rates and they might look good, but are they really good? Or are they misleading what people are actually seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So that goes back to what are you really looking at in terms of tracking your payment operations, right? Because if you look at a broad metric like average approval rate, that could be misleading because averages really hide concentration. Right. That's the short of it, right? Because, a single number is great because it looks very clean. And if I say approval rate is, 92%, everybody nods, right? Like it sounds very precise. But in reality, that number can hide a lot of pain, right? Like payments is not one homogeneous stream. It's a mix of payment methods, mix of issuers, bin ranges, domestic, cross-border, card present, card not present, bunch of merchants, multiple device types, application paths, etc. So even if your overall approval rate is stable, you can still have a very serious problem in a slice that matters a lot commercially, right? For example, like a high value cross-border debit cohort is down sharply. Maybe one issuer on one route is failing. Approvals are fine, for example, but existing customers are doing well. But for new customers, they're going through authentication 3DS challenge. None of that shows up in the average. Is that starting to make sense in the question?
That you have a lot of times where everything is going. And what I really loved is you said averages hide concentration. And that there are things that if you dig deeper, there are problems happening that truth is, I've always been taught, you tell me you got a 92% approval rate, that's good. Well, what's happening in that 8%? Because if I'm not in the 99 and a half, I think there's a problem.
Obviously. And then also, the other thing, Kevin, is that the averages issue sometimes, or why that is caused, is a shift in the mix, right? So if one segment degrades and another segment improves, the averages look flat while the business is actually hurting. So it's not just like maybe only one segment hurting, but a lot of times there's a shift that happens. And this is dangerous in payments because not all transactions are equally valuable. So if you see a drop in a high intent, high values, that matters much more than a slight move in a lower value segment. But again, the average doesn't really, tell you that story. I can do like a very quick example if that works, or
I love examples. Examples help us to make it real. And I know a lot of people listening, it gives that visual picture too.
Exactly. So I think, and all payment people will immediately get this, right? So imagine your overall approval rate for the day is fine. But let's say mobile wallet approvals above $200 are suddenly down for like one of the issuer families in the UK after a rules change. The average barely moves because the slice is very small relative to the whole, but the customers affected are high value and the revenue impact per hour is real. If your operating model is built around the average, you won't see it until it's a bigger problem, right? So which is why broad metrics are useful as a starting point, but they're not where the truth lives, right? Like it's usually always in the segmentation, and like you just said, it is in the concentration, and it's in the delta between what is normal and what is basically happening right now.
Well, okay, something else I got to ask, because everybody knows I am highly passionate about instant payments and faster payments and what they're doing. So if we throw instant and faster payments, which are newer in the US, into this, and how we've got the faster, we've got an increasing ecosystem complexity too. How's that affecting operations? Is it changing things? Is it improving things?
Yeah, I think if anything, the instant payment stuff like makes the time sensitivity of what we're talking about, even more bigger, right? Like I think you have to sort of like really stay on it, and then the more time you're taking to identify what segment, what part of it is actually suffering, the more you're losing on the business. So if anything, it makes it even more time sensitive.
Well, and okay, you talk about losing money too. Yeah. And I know sometimes that there's people don't realize, hey, there's leakage taking place in your
Correct,
payments.
correct.
Where's that at? I mean, I think you mentioned
Yeah,
a couple of ideas there, but I'd like to just call out specifically, where do you
yeah,
normally see the leakage
yeah.
in payments happening?
Yeah. I actually, I have a couple bullets basically just so I make sure I cover some of the key points there, right? Because usually leakage hides in places that are too small to trigger, panic, so to say individually, but they are big enough to matter over time. So let's take like the first one. I think the most obvious one is false declines, right? So everybody in payments talks about false declines because they're real, but they're also expensive. But even there, I don't think it's a dramatic collapse. It's a very slow leak, right? Let's say one rule is very aggressive. One particular issuer corridor again behaves differently than expected. One payment method introduces extra friction. You lose a little bit every hour, and unless somebody is really watching the right sort of segment, again, it becomes normalized. That's number one. So the second one is routing inefficiency, right? Maybe the payment goes through, but it goes through on a more expensive or a less optimal path, or like the first attempt fails and the retry succeeds. So from a top line sort of headline perspective, things don't look terrible, but customer experience is worse, economics are worse, right? So teams often underappreciate how much leakage is in these not broken enough to page anyone situations. And then the third one I would say is operational side effects, right? Like, so fraud controls are an example. Like a fraud team, with the right intent makes a sensible change to reduce risk. On paper, it'll actually improve that metric. But downstream, it causes more good customers to get challenged or decline in a specific segment. So again, you're paying in conversion, right? Like, so it's not like a particular team made a bad decision, but the leak happens in the interaction between systems and teams. There are a few more softer forms of leakage outside of these top three. Like incident response was poor, like retry strategy, suboptimal acquirer configuration, etc. But if I had to like really summarize, I'd say revenue leakage is hiding where the three things are true, right? Like the signal is fragmented, like I started off with my early thesis on how many moving parts there are. The issue is concentrated in a slice rather than visible in the average. Again, one of the early points I made. And there's no fast owner-driven response loop, basically. So that's kind of really, does that make sense in terms of leakage?
It does. I mean, but what it makes me think is, okay, the leakage is number one, false declines, two, routing inefficiencies, and three, really in operations and controls. I wonder, is that the same as saying, hey, those are the blind spots that we see across the merchants, the acquirers?
Correct.
Or are there other
so.
areas that they're missing? Because you also mentioned the incident response. So would that be one and the same, that, hey, you're leaking here because it's a blind spot? Or are there other things that they need to be looking at to make sure that, hey, don't overlook this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think having blind spots, or let's just say you did not have blind spots and you found out the issue and you found out the signal, but then having the right operating culture in terms of like, do you have a good response loop? Do you have like a good normalized way of saying, here's how I do things? Because multiple different patterns pop up. So that's sort of a little orthogonal. It's kind of linked, but I would say that's how I would look at the difference. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. But okay, here.
Yeah.
I don't want to run out of time. I got to ask you, Bhaskar. You've talked to me about AI. You've talked to me about automation. I want to start solving for this. So I want to know, where can automation and AI help payments teams today? But something that's also really important. A lot of people are afraid AI is going to take their jobs. So I want to know not just how automation and AI can help make this happen, but where are humans going to stay involved as well?
Yeah, absolutely. What happens is, one of the things that comes up when people talk about automation and AI is that, the machine's going to run the business. I mean, I don't think that's the right sort of mode. How do we sort of have like a slow, methodical way of doing this? And if I were to summarize what we need to do with it, I feel like what AI and automation should do is to really take the slow, repetitive, cross-system detective work out of the loop, right? So not sort of take like the judgment out of the loop, because I think you still need humans to do the judgment, to help with that, to have the accountability. But how do you take out the slow, repetitive cross-system, detective work, right? And the first job for AI is just monitoring with context, not just watching one metric, but watching all the slices, which is humanly like like not even possible. That's the first job, right? And we talked about a bunch of examples on segments. The second job is triage. When a signal moves, the system automatically asks the first set of questions. Any great operator would ask, where is this concentrated? What changed around time? Which owner likely needs to look at it, and what's the impact, right? Like, those are the questions. And the third job is recommendation, not necessarily executing something, but based on prior patterns. Again, something that AI is really good at. Configured playbooks. Again, procedurally, AI is great at that. What are the next plausible steps? And let me just, again, give you a very simple example. Again, overall approval rate, 92%, dashboard looks great, but inside that, one specific slice, card not present, cross-border, 2 issuers in, France, UK, wherever, routed through processor A, has fallen to 71% in the last 18 minutes, right? The system correlates that with a recent config change and a spike in timeout errors from that route, instead of just sending approval down to a generic Slack channel. It gives you a very crisp brief. Here's the affected cohort. Here's the revenue at risk. Maybe shift percentage of the traffic to processor B, notify the payments owner. So that is where AI helps, because what it's doing is it's compressing the time between signal and the first response that you offer to it, which is kind of very, very important. I have another use case, but I want to make sure that that's sort of like.
Well, hold on. I just want to make sure I got this, because
yeah.
I believe you said something I'm telling people all the time. I love AI. I love using AI, but AI is an assistant, not a replacement.
Correct.
AI assists you in doing the things you want to do. And like you said, taking the repetitive stuff and seeing a bigger picture I can't see, or things that I don't want to do every day. The triage piece too, of being able to identify what happened, where it happened, when it happened, that I wouldn't be able to detect myself, especially in that bigger picture. And then giving the recommendations and the playbooks. Okay. I love all of that, but you also mentioned the compressing the time and the speed. And what that brings to account, kind of like what we said in the faster payments, is if you start reacting fast or you start acting fast, are you going to start creating more risk? So how should organizations look at all of this, take all of this, but act quickly without creating another risk or another problem? Because that's one of the things we repeatedly said. So what's your advice on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most critical things, because if you don't bring that dimension in, then you're kind of like, maybe automating, maybe doing a bunch of things in payment ops, but like it will not eventually, it'll end up actually hurting the business, right? So what I'd say to that is that a lot of people here, act faster, and, immediately they start worrying about obviously automation risk. And that's kind of what we're talking about. But acting faster doesn't have to mean acting recklessly. It means you shorten the time it takes to understand what's going on, which is, like I was saying, detective work. And then you put the right level of control around the response, right? The 2 terms that sort of come to mind in terms of this particular aspect of it. Number 1 is reversibility, and number 2 is blast radius, right? If an action is low risk, reversible, and narrowly scoped, right, you can be much more aggressive. If it's high risk, broad, or hard to undo, you slow down and put human approval on it. Because at the end of the day, you can do all the automation you want, you can do all of the AI automation that you want, but humans need to be accountable for decisions or automation that you actually did. So, for example, if you detect a localized degradation on one route and you want to reroute 5% of traffic temporarily to a backup path, while the team investigates, that can be a very reasonable, very tightly bound action. On the other hand, if you're talking about changing a fraud policy broadly, or changing customer-facing behavior, or doing anything with free structure or really big things like compliance, that absolutely deserves more friction, because there is such a thing as good friction based on, again, reversibility and blast radius. So in payments, the danger is not just being wrong, it's being wrong fast at scale. So it's not sort of like saying, hey, there's no friction at all. It is selective friction. So rate limits, approvals, audit logs, etc. And that's basically where it should say, show what changed, show the affected cohort, show the impact, and then pick and automate the observation, automate the first pass investigation, automate recommendations. And that's how you can get faster, but you don't lose control. Does that make
Okay.
sense? I think that is a concrete,
It does. And
yeah.
I got to tell you, I think you just said like the theme, the word I at least have stuck on for the podcast so far, selective friction. Like that's what you're
Correct.
really being able to put in place is selecting the right amount of friction because there
Yeah.
does need to be a certain amount. Not enough
Yeah.
friction, you're going to have losses and fraud. Too much friction, users aren't going to use it. So getting it right.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people listening too are sitting there going, okay, I want to know what I do for a solution. I want to be able to, let's say it's a payments leader out there, CEO, senior
Yeah.
management of a team, and they
Yeah.
want something and they want to get it by the end of next quarter.
Yeah.
Where do they?
Perfect. Yeah. I'd say the simplest thing to do is start small. Start with one KPI, one owner, one playbook, right? It sounds simple, but it's very powerful because if you normalize it, you can actually replicate it easier. Most organizations, try to boil the ocean, right? They're like, hey, we need a payments operations transformation, right? I mean, you see the word transformation used across the board so many times, right? It's just too abstract. Pick one problem that matters and make it really, really tight operationally. So for most teams, I would say very good starting point is authorization performance. That's the key. That's the one that we start with multiple of our customers. For a revenue critical segment, start with authorization performance. Not overall, just pick one segment. Cross-border e-commerce approvals or wallet approvals above a certain ticket size, just be very specific. Or approval performance for a top merchant cohort. Like focus on the 80% of your business, for example. Define exactly what good looks like. Define what dimensions matter. Who owns the first response and what the first 3 actions are when the signal moves, right? You don't have to capture the 10 possible ones. Just pick the first 3. Then build the loop around it, right? Make sure the data is clean. Make sure the baselines are sensible. And when I say baselines, they have to be adaptive. They cannot be static thresholds on this is a good number, this is a bad number. Make sure the owner is clear. Make sure the notifications are specific and add a playbook, right? Like make sure there's a real playbook. If you do that well for one KPI, you learn a lot. You learn where your data definitions are weak. You learn where ownership is fuzzy. You learn where the real friction is, and then you can expand. So it's not like some giant strategy comes in and you change that in one day. It's just one narrow, high value operating loop. And once people see that it catches issues earlier and saves money on time, the rest of the organization starts to pull for it. So again, one KPI, one owner, one playbook, this quarter, versus saying, I'm just going to do this transformation. Does that make sense? It's just more practical.
I almost feel like we should be charging for people to listen to this because what you just gave right there, that's some valuable advice. I mean, I absolutely love that. That is a detailed strategy of what they can do to be able to resolve this. Now, forgive me, but I got to ask, I'm assuming you can help solve for all this. So my question would be is, how do you solve for it? And how do people get in touch with you if they want to solve for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bicycle is an AI analytics system for operational businesses, including payments. Like payments and retail are some of the big segments we solve this for. And the simplest way to think about this is that it watches the business the way, let's say, observability tools will watch software. So in payments, instead of just showing you that the approvals moved, it helps identify where the change is concentrated, what likely caused it, what the impact is, and what the next safe action should be. A very concrete example, again, would be overall authorization looks stable, one corridor is broken. A system like Bicycle, what it'll do is it'll catch that pattern, it'll explain it, and then help it get to the right team fast enough to matter, versus basically saying, one of the team is seeing one dashboard, the other team is seeing one dashboard. You stitch it across Slack and start finding something. So that's really what Bicycle focuses on. Authorization, up and down approvals, starting with those patterns. So Bicycle is a very simple loop, right? Like on top of your business data, I call it detect, explain, act, and learn, right? So you detect the signal, you explain why it's happening, where is it concentrated, and why, what are the potential drivers. Act is a set of recommendations, again, keeping like blast radius and reversibility in mind. And learn is basically the learning group basically saying if Bicycle's AI is recommending something, it's saying something else, or it's recommending a particular option. How does it learn from it that it's doing the right thing? It has the right presets. It's looking at the right knowledge. And getting in touch with me is super easy. We are at bicycle.ai. Or you can reach out to me at Bhaskar at BHASKAR at bicycle.ai. So pretty straightforward.
Well, I love what you shared today. I mean, we started
Yeah.
off with complexity in payments. You helped
Yeah.
us to see how averages actually hide the concentration of what's really happening in there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, automation risk. Acting faster does not equal or should not be
Correct.
acting recklessly. Absolutely.
Correct.
I love that. Selective friction. But then one owner, one KPI, one playbook, make it happen, make it real. And then you can provide a solution that helps to detect, explain, act, and learn.
It's a great summary, Kevin.
We've learned a lot today. And I want to say too, to everybody out there listening, I'll make sure that I put your email address up there and your website so they can get in touch with you. And those of you listening, if there is a topic, or maybe if there's somebody you think needs to be on the payments podium, just send me a message, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I will do all I can to make sure that they get on here, because when it comes to learning about payments, it takes all of us working together. But this is the part where I get to say, hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Class dismissed.
There's a world out there, it's a digital maze where dollars move in mysterious ways. Complex systems, rules, and regulations. The payments professor sparks revelations. No need